Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So, just like I've been saying at the beginning of each of these chapters, it's going to get darker from here on out. So, trigger warning, all of them apply. I do believe that is all I have for the moment. So, without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 10. The Descent Beckons. What department do we want again? Lupin asked, studying the embossed ministry directory with some confusion. Sirius, leaning against the wall nearby, glanced over with a small yawn. It was still early morning, and neither of them had gotten much sleep. The Department for Missing Witches and Wizards, he said. It's usually on the third floor on Tuesdays. I don't see it, said Lupin, and turned back to the directory. Privately, he thought they were wasting their time, but since Ron had now been gone for hours, and with Molly and Arthur panicked, this was the best place to search as any. The clock on the wall still showed him to be traveling, but Ron was nowhere to be found. Owls had been sent to all relatives, the old crowd dispatched, Dumbledore notified. It now remained to make it an official matter of a missing wizard. That Arthur still trusted the ministry surprised Lupin, and as he scanned the list of departments with a raised eyebrow, he stopped when he read, "The Department for the Misuse of Muggles." Lupin blinked. Shouldn't that be misuse of Muggle artifacts? Sirius came to stand beside Lupin, smelling strongly of something floral. Lupin's nose twitched. The full moon would be here shortly, and his sense of smell was always stronger just before he changed. "Must you use gardenia soap?" he demanded, unable to help himself, but Sirius ignored him as he also scanned the directory with curious, dark eyes, then laughed without amusement. "Oh, everything's arsed up properly, isn't it? Come along then. We'll just keep opening doors until we find someone who knows where we need to go." "That seems like it will take a long time." "Piffle," said Sirius succinctly, and took off for the nearest staircase. Lupin followed Sirius up the stairs. At the top was a long corridor, identical to hundreds of other ministry corridors. The polished marble floors seemed to stretch into infinity, lined with oak doors. Sirius strode up to the first door, whose plaque declared it to be the Department for the Regulation of Regulations, and pushed it open. Inside, a small pixie-faced witch was sitting at a desk and looked up, then frowned. Her nameplate proclaimed her to be Miss Alice Wack. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for the Department for Missing Witches and Wizards," Sirius said in his most charming voice. "Might you be able to assist me?" Usually, Sirius's most charming voice melted the hearts of witches like chocolate in the hot summer sun, but this one looked merely nervous. "I'm sure I don't know where that is. This is the Department for the Regulation of Ensorcelled Fruits and Vegetables." Sirius's eyebrow quirked, and he chanced a glance at the plaque, then looked back at the witch behind the desk. "That's not what the door says." Her flush deepened. "I think you'd better talk to Mr. Malfoy," she said. "He's in charge of the renovation plan." "Bloody Lucius Malfoy," said Sirius through his teeth. "I'll show that maniacal bastard renovations. I'll renovate his face." Lupin pulled Sirius away from the door. "Thank you," he called back to the witch. and shut the door firmly behind them. "Sirius, this is ridiculous. All roads lead to Lucius. You know that. I doubt there is a department for missing witches and wizards anymore. Or if there is, it's been transfigured into a hat stand. Why are we bothering?" But Sirius's eyes were bright with anger. This, Lupin knew, meant there would be no talking to him. He strode up to the second door on his right, which proclaimed it to be the Department for the Regulation of Divination, and threw it open. Inside, the office was empty, save for a desk upon which sat an enormous crystal ball. It lit up when they poked their heads in, and spoke in a high, trilling voice. "Welcome to the Department for the Regulation of Divination," it said. "We were expecting your visit, and have therefore elected to be out of the office." Sirius turned slowly to Lupin. "This isn't going to work, is it?" "No," Lupin said gently. "Look, if you like, we can look for Francis Parkinson instead. He's temporary minister." "He'll be on the 4th floor in half an hour," piped the crystal ball, "in the Department for the Regulation of Memory Charms." Sirius raised an eyebrow. "Well then, off we go," he said. As he reached for the doorknob, the crystal ball piped up one last time. "I'd tell you to have a nice day," it announced, "but I already know you won't." "Oh, sod off," said Sirius sharply, and slammed the door behind them. Ron had suffered a number of rude awakenings in his life. When he was 7 years old, George and Fred had practiced an Accio spell on him while he was sleeping, and he had awoken the next morning in the lettuce patch. But nothing had quite prepared him for waking up on the bare stone floor of a deserted castle, surrounded by broken chess pieces. He bolted upright so swiftly that his head spun. There was a sound of a giggle somewhere off to his left, and he turned to see a girl in a cage. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Ugh," he said, and looked away from her, then felt his head. There was a painful bruise just above his left eyebrow, and he was still in the clothes he'd worn to the manor party, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. "The Dark Lord's gone, if that's what's worrying you," she said. "He won't be back until nightfall." Ron only partially registered this as he looked around. The room was as he remembered, although the first time he had seen it, he had not noticed its subtle beauty. The chairs that glowed like thrones on the polished stone floor, the torches held up on pillars wound with carved vines, the enormous fireplace carved with angels who hid their eyes behind their wings. Within a huge grate, a fire burned fiercely green and orange, but there were two things that were missing. Nowhere in this vast jewel box of a castle were any doors or windows that opened to the outside. He turned back to Rhys, who was still sitting quietly inside her shining prison. "They brought you some food," she said a bit listlessly, and pointed at a silver salver which sat atop one of the tables. Ron almost ran over to it and flung himself on the meal. It was extremely simple. Bread, cheese, some chocolate. He didn't care. He was starving. "Nice place you have here," he said around a mouthful of cheese. "Quite a change from the Barrow," she said, "isn't it?" He turned towards her in surprise and found that she was smiling. "How did you—" he began, but Rhys waved a dismissive hand at him. "The Dark Lord knows all about your family, and, therefore, so do I." Ron didn't know what to say to that, so instead he went back to staring around the room. "There aren't any doors here that lead outside, are there?" "No," Rhys said, twirling a lock of silky black hair idly around a finger. Ron laughed shortly. "So I can't leave this place, then?" "No," said Rhys lightly. Ron stopped eating for a moment and regarded her through the bars of her prison, a slight frown puckering the space between his eyebrows. "Could you leave if you wanted to, or are you bound to that cage?" Rhys looked at him then, and her eyes were eerie in the dim light. "I cannot leave without Lucius's permission. I am bound to him, and this gold is a metal most unloved by my kind, for it resembles the sun, which we despise. It also restricts my ability to use certain powers of mine." Ron did not hear this last sentence of hers. His mind was whirling. "So, you're a demon?" She simply smiled. "Demon is a word you mortals use to describe motives you don't understand. I'm so much more than that," she replied. "But my father was a Malfoy." "Right," said Ron, picking up the nearest chess piece. It was hard as a rock. "So, you're all demon, then?" She frowned at him. "I do not think you understand the honor I do you, telling you the truth of my nature." That brought Ron up short. "Why me?" "Because there is no one here for you to betray me to," she said simply. "And never again shall you return to tell this story. There is no road back for you from this place." "That's not true," Ron said. "I'll escape." "There is no escape." "And Harry will come and find me," Ron said. She raised her eyes and looked at him. He saw how gray they were, had seen it that first day when she had come down the stairs with Charlie. "After what you did? Are you sure?" she asked. "You don't know Harry," Ron replied. "Oh, don't I?" Her voice was amused, curious. "He gives love out carelessly, that one, and often where it is undeserving. You think I don't understand, but I do. I have lived 600 years, and I have seen the results of love. Fate may be impartial and justice blind, but love hates mankind, and knows well that the best way to make him suffer is to kiss him with her sickness." Ron did not look at her. He looked instead at the chessboard, with its repeated squares of light and dark. When he spoke, his voice was even. "Harry will come. I know he will. Even if he has to walk through fire to get here." "You have faith in him, then?" Rhys asked, her tone a question. "Love is faith," said Ron. For a moment she looked almost startled. "Where have you heard that?" she demanded. Ron hesitated a moment, then replied with the truth. There was no reason to lie. "In a vision," he said. "It was something I saw in my head." "You are a diviner," Rhys replied, almost lazily. "I don't want to be." Ron's voice was without emotion. After a moment, Rhys asked, "Would you like to go for a walk?" Ron turned back to regard her. "A walk?" he said. "A walk to where?" "To the roof," she said with a smile. "Plan to throw me off it, I suppose." In answer, Rhys's smile only broadened. "Unlock my cage, and I can promise you won't regret it." "What do you suppose he's doing here?" Lupin asked as they reached the 4th floor, where supposedly the new Minister of Magic was. The distant door they were now standing before appeared to have a plaque on it which read, "The Department for the Regulation of Memory Charms." Sirius shrugged and pushed the door open. Inside was an ordinary ministry office. Desks, chairs, floating roll of scrolls, and piles of empty ink bottles waiting to be refilled by office elves. He recognized very few of the dark-robed men milling about between the desks, but a few he knew by sight and did not like. In the center of the room stood a stoutish, balding wizard with a round, hard face and a pug nose, whom Sirius recognized instantly as the newly elected minister, Francis Parkinson. As if sensing their presence, he looked up. "It's Sirius Black, isn't it?" he said after a moment. "It is," Sirius said, his voice sounding tight even to his own ears. "And I was actually hoping to talk to you, Minister, if I may." Francis Parkinson made a low, rumbling noise in his throat, as he seemed to consider Sirius's request. Then he leaned back against the desk behind him, looking superior, but nodded. "What is it you wish to discuss?" "I came about a missing person, Ronald Weasley," Sirius said. Something dark flashed in Mr. Parkinson's eyes, but it was gone in a moment, and he snorted. "The Weasleys suddenly missing a brat?" he inquired. "How can they even tell?" Sirius gritted his teeth, and Lupin took the moment to interject. "He's been missing since the party yesterday," he said. "I see," said Mr. Parkinson. "There's another Weasley spawn here who refuses to return home, despite all inducements to the contrary." "Percy is here because he works here," said Lupin tightly. "Ron could be lost somewhere, injured, unable to return home. It could be bad publicity for the Ministry if nothing was done to find him." "Oh, no," said Mr. Parkinson, his small eyes having taken on a mean edge. "Not bad publicity. We all saw what happened at the party. I dare say our children can surprise us. But after what young Weasley did, well, wouldn't you be afraid to return home?" "Are you suggesting that Ron is afraid to return because he's afraid of Harry?" Sirius demanded, incredulous. "I'm not suggesting it," Mr. Parkinson said. "I'm simply stating a fact." The surrounding Ministry officials sniggered appreciatively. "Death Eaters all," Sirius thought angrily. "Harry Potter is dangerously unstable," Mr. Parkinson went on smoothly. "The wizarding world has known this for years, but fear and recalcitrant administrations have prevented us from doing anything about it. Need I remind you that the last time a Majid went renegade, a team of hit wizards had to be dispatched to deal with the problem?" "Harry's never shown a spark of interest in abusing his powers," Sirius sputtered. "Perhaps," said Mr. Parkinson slyly. "However, all sorts of things could trigger it. Rage, of course, a desire for revenge, grief over a terrible loss of some sort." "That's enough," said Lupin, cutting across the other man like a knife cutting through bone. Sirius turned to look at his friend, and could see the other man's anger burning in his eyes, as cold and immovable as a Durmstrang glacier. "You may be shielded by powerful magics and more powerful friends, but they cannot always be there to protect you," Lupin said evenly. "Nor will their protections last forever." To his credit, Mr. Parkinson held his ground, but the force of Lupin's words seemed to have taken some of the wind out of his sails, and his voice was high and thin as he said, "If I were you, I would not return here again. There is nothing for you here, Sirius Black, or for your pet werewolf." At that, Sirius stepped forward and placed a hand on Lupin's shoulder. "We're going," he said, "but before we do, I just want to know one thing, Francis. Why?" Again, something flickered in Mr. Parkinson's eyes. "Ronald Weasley is the same age as my daughter," he said coolly, "and, as you can see, she has not been spared either. In war, there are no innocents." "Are we at war?" Lupin asked flatly. I hadn't noticed. Indeed, said Mr. Parkinson, and by the time you do, you will already have lost. The evening sky was violet, the color of blood. Ron sat at the edge of the castle's roof and looked down. It stood perched on the top of a cliff that fell away below on all sides, steep and sheer as the side of a razor blade. Far below, the cliff vanished into clouds, through which the slender line of a river was visible, rocketing along between the walls of a chasm. Mountains were all that was discernible in the distance. Ron felt as if he stood at the edge of the world. It's a nice night, he said. Any night is better than the day, said Rhys, her tone positive, and her dress blowing around her like wings in the cold mountain air. Careful, she said. If you fall, I cannot catch you. The Dark Lord would be displeased if I let you die. So, what? You're just here to watch me, then? He asked. Yes, she said, and sat down then, about a foot from the roof's edge, her black skirt spreading around her like dark water. But I will talk to you, too, if you desire. About what? Ron demanded. Whatever you like. You're being awfully agreeable, Ron said bitterly. I suppose you've been told to keep me happy. What's next? Turn yourself into Hermione and offer to shag me? She opened her grey eyes wide. Is that what you want me to do? No, but it would be a demon's trick. I already told you I'm not a demon. You know, being vague isn't the best way to get people to believe that you're not a demon, Ron said, but happy to be off the subject of Hermione. Rhys looked briefly amused. It's a long story. I can tell you if you like. Ron shoved his hands in his pockets. He was cold. It isn't like I have anything else better to do. Rhys took a deep breath. 600 years ago, she said, a wizard, an ancestor of the Malfoys, fell in love with a woman. I cannot shake the feeling, somehow, that I am responsible for sending a student to his death. Snape turned away from the potions table, where he had been testing the temperature of several bubbling cauldrons. What did you say, headmaster? The older man, looking out the window at the darkening sky, did not reply for a moment. Finally he said, It was nothing, Severus. Ah. Snape returned his gaze to his cauldrons. After a moment, he spoke again. Sirius Black has said that he will be giving him the news about Weasley today. Don't be surprised if he disappears after that. You are correct, Severus. And you feel confident in letting him go? I feel confident that I could not force him to stay. Dumbledore inclined his head, his tone remote. Perhaps I have had all the time with him that I am allowed, and have gone beyond the point where there is anything else I can tell him. The question now is whether or not he will choose to listen to what he has learned. Potter has never been much of a listener, said Snape, selecting a vial of rosy liquid and pouring it into the leftmost cauldron. The liquid turned black, and Snape, muttering, made a check mark with his quill on a nearby tablet of parchment. If Draco dies, he went on, but Dumbledore cut across him. If Draco dies, Harry will be devastated, and it would take a wiser hand than mine, and more time than we have, to put him back together. And yet... And yet what? And yet, how to separate them? for they must be separated, for this most recent issue has changed all of my plans." "You think they are too close, then?" "Yes." Dumbledore ruminated. "It isn't good for either of them." "I am glad," said Snape, some sarcasm creeping into his tone, "to see you finally take issue with whether or not being led about by Potter is at all good for Draco." "I do not think that he is led. I think he chooses to follow, which is a different issue entirely. In the past, we have seen that Harry has been the best thing that ever happened to Draco. But now, Harry must face this next step of his journey alone." "He will not like that." No, he will not." "I thought your policy was not to intervene," said Snape, waving his wand at the furthest cauldron. Its flame flickered and went out. "It is," said Dumbledore. "I will not intervene." "Once upon a time," said Reason, "there was a wizard, and he was a Malfoy, and he wore it as a badge of pride. And, like all Malfoys, his pride exceeded his wisdom. Bad deeds, bad faith. How could anyone bearing a name like that expect to be anything but the darkest of dark wizards? Anyway, this wizard lived in a southern city, and fancied himself a great doer of black deeds. He liked to call up storms that would destroy all the ships in the harbor. He cast a yellow plague over his city, and when that did not satisfy him, he cast a red one. On Tuesdays he summoned volleys of flaming arrows, and on Wednesdays he made the city river run red with blood. This was very bad for local property values, but the wizard did not care, and besides, he had no plans to sell his mountaintop castle any time soon. Comeuppance for his behavior came to him, as comeuppance often does, in the form of a woman, a beauty with long black hair and eyes like coals. He glimpsed her dancing amid a crowd of nobles, and when he inquired after her, was told that she was the daughter of a prosperous wizarding family. He determined that he would marry her, and sent a message to said family, ordering them to deliver up their daughter speedily. They did so, which did not surprise him. After all, it was never wise to say no to a wizard. The marriage took place speedily, and for several weeks the wizard was very happy with his new bride. True, she had a number of odd habits. She never ate in front of him, preferring to take all her meals alone in her room. He never saw her during the day, for she claimed to have a rare skin allergy that made her extremely sensitive to sunlight. When he tried to give her gold jewelry, she shrank from it in disgust, claiming that she had been brought up to find gold ostentatious and unattractive. She allowed him, however, to buy her as much silver jewelry as he liked, and seemed to have an especial fondness for green gemstones. All these things were odd, but she more than made up for her small peculiarities in other areas. Indeed, she was so remarkably skilled in the arts of giving pleasure that he found he could not be with her often enough. If it had not been for her insistence upon withdrawing to her own bedroom for meals, he would not have been able to part from her at all. His studies suffered, as did his practice of magic. All he thought of was her. He dreamed of drowning himself in the nets of her dark hair, burning himself on the coals of her eyes, abandoning himself to the drowsy sensuality of her touch. He wanted nothing but her, and dreamed of nothing else. He would have killed any man who touched her. It was not long before the peculiar behavior of the wizard's new bride began to excite talk amongst his servants. The house elves seemed afraid of her. Their ears trembled when she came near, and when she walked down the halls they slunk before her like whipped dogs. But the human servants also seemed to dislike her. At first, the wizard put it down to jealousy, at least on part of the female staff. But when his most favoured manservant announced his intention to leave, the wizard lost his temper and asked what could be so wrong that he would wish to leave. "It is your wife, sir," was all the man would say. "She isn't human." An unpleasant silence followed, in which the wizard stood and glared at his servant, who looked stolidly at his shoes. "What do you mean?" the wizard ground out finally. "She is the daughter of a noble family." "I have made inquiries, my lord," said the servant. "That family has no daughters. She is not who she says she is." At that, the wizard raged and ordered the servant out of his sight, and later sent word to his guards and had the man whipped. But the servant's words stayed with him, as truth often does. For days he could not get the man's words out of his head. She isn't human. And he thought about his new wife. He thought about her allergy to sunlight and the way she never ate in his presence. He thought about her hatred of gold. He thought about her black hair and white skin, and from such tiny beginnings, doubts began to grow like seedlings in his heart, putting forth their branches, unfurling their leaves, until even the memory of love was suffocated. The wizard decided to follow his wife the next time she left the castle. He did not have long to wait. She had a habit of walking in the woods alone at night, and the next time she set forth upon one of her solitary journeys, he followed her. She made her way to the heart of the forest, clutching witchlight to guide her way. At the center of it was a clearing, and as she stepped into it, called out in a voice that made him shiver. And from the shadows between the rocks and the spaces between the trees evolved a host of shapes. Other women, like his wife, all with dark hair, burning eyes, and all of them beautiful. The wizard sank back against the tree and stared at them. They came together, these women, and greeted each other like sisters. And then they sat together in a circle and discussed their situations. Each, it seemed, was a succubus. Each had recently married a mortal man, and each complained bitterly and intently of the boredom of these marriages, of the inadequacy of their human husbands, and how loathsome they found them. And as he listened to this, the wizard felt his heart grow cold and shrivel inside him, until he wondered that the blood still moved in his veins. The she-beasts then waxed philosophical. It seemed that as they began to tire of their marriages, the more their minds longed to return to their lives as true succubi, but not before draining the life out of their wizard spouses. At that, the wizard was hard-pressed to restrain himself from drawing his wand and damning the consequences. But then the group of women rose as one and kissed each other in farewell and began to slip away from the clearing, each returning confidently to a besotted and unsuspecting man who had unwittingly married them. The wizard remained there while the night waned, and the sun rose over the forest. And when the day broke, his heart had shrunk to the size of a splinter of glass, and all his thoughts were thoughts of vengeance. Over the next few days, the wizard spent that time closeted in his tower, perfecting a number of spells. Then he dressed himself in his finest robes and went to his wife's chamber. She greeted him there as modestly and sweetly as she always had, taking his hands and drawing him to the bed. But he resisted her. All her beauty seemed to have taken on a ghoulish aspect. She sensed his mood and wished to know if anything was wrong. He did not answer right away, but bid her lay down on the bed. And she did so, shrugging her robes to the floor and stretching herself out along the sheets. She looked up at him through her hair as he drew out a number of silk ribbons from his pockets and held them up. With a cat's smile, she held out her wrists. He knelt over her and bound them together, and then her ankles, before she could protest. Then suddenly she writhed in sudden anguish. "What have you done to me?" she wailed. "Gold," he said with some satisfaction, for threads of the metal had been woven by enchantment into the ribbons. "And may it burn your skin to the bone, demon witch. May you writhe in the anguish you planned for me before I hurl you out into the sunlight and end your hellish existence." She wept and pleaded then for mercy and begged him to spare her life, but he had stopped his heart to her pleas. All his love for her had curdled into the purest hate. At last she subsided into silence and lay limp in her agonizing bonds. "My lord," she said, looking up at him, "I know now that you will show me no mercy. But there is something that you do not know. I carry your child inside my body. Your blood runs in its veins. Will you not, then, show mercy to your own offspring?" The wizard had planned to kill his succubus wife immediately, but when he learned that she was pregnant, his plans took a different turn. It was not that he had a sentimental attachment to the idea of a child. It was that it was something of his blood and breeding. He had a cage built inside the largest of his halls, and all its bars were made of solid gold. The succubus he cast inside it, and there she withered, and there she died, poisoned by the metal all around her. But even as she died, the baby inside her body waxed and grew healthy. At last, the child was delivered, and once it was cut from her body, the succubus crumbled away to dust, which the wizard scattered on the wind. Then he went to look upon his daughter. She had been born with a mane of long, dark hair, long nails, the colour of blood, and skin like white snow. The wizard took her and set her down in a patch of sunlight, and she began to weep and to wriggle in pain, but she did not die. "You are mine," said the wizard. "However, there is always the chance you will revert to the maternal strain. Precautions must therefore be taken before you can begin to be useful to me." His daughter looked at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes that were like his own, set in a face of what he hated. And perhaps his voice was not so steady as he called for his servants, and perhaps his hand was not firm as he held his wand, but it made no difference to the effectiveness of his spells. He had had 9 months to work on them, and they were perfect. He cast first a spell that would bind the child to that side of her inheritance which was human in nature, and which was Malfoy. For as long as she lived, she would be unable to lift a hand to harm anyone of his blood. Her obedience he also bound. She would be obedient to the head of the Malfoy family, bound to do their bidding, whatever they might ask. Their lightest request would be her law. She would come and go at their pleasure, and when they died she would pass, like an inherited trinket, to the next in the family line. All these spells and bindings the wizard laid upon the child, and when he was done, he lifted her up in his arms and kissed her once on the forehead, and then he set her down inside the golden cage which had killed her mother, and walked away. He did not speak to his daughter again for 10 years. "Are you saying I cannot see my son?" Narcissa's voice was like ice. Sirius looked at her and swallowed nervously. "I'm saying it isn't safe." Her mouth tightened. Standing by the window in the small upstairs room, her arms were tight against her sides, her shoulders straight and angular. Everything about her body language forbade approach, so Sirius stood where he was, unsure what to do. The house they were in made him nervous. It belonged to an old friend of Narcissa's, and was very obviously the abode of previous Death Eaters. He could not have explained how he knew this, but everything in the house teased at his old aura senses, whispering of a history of malignant spells and spilled blood, layered over with a skin of rich furnishings. Narcissa put her hand to the sash of the curtains. Outside, the sky had gone from a grey-white pearl to a black one, and the room was full of shadows. "I want to see my child," she said. "He's ill, and even though you won't tell me how ill, I can see it in your face, Sirius, that he's very ill indeed." "He's in Dumbledore's hands," Sirius said. "He and Snape will do everything they can for him. It's not safe for you to go to Hogwarts. You know that. The Ministry is entirely controlled by Lucius at this point. He's watching the Flu Network. He'll be watching the roads to Hogwarts. He'll be trying to keep an eye on Draco." "Is he dying?" she asked. Sirius felt his muscles tense. "What?" For a moment, Narcissa's face seemed to flicker, and behind it he saw another face, all iron. "You heard me. Is my son dying?" Sirius hesitated. "Yes," he said. Her hand fell from the window sash, but she made no other movement. "I want you to promise me something, then," she said. "Yes," he said again. "Whatever you want." "If my son is going to die, then I want to be there when it happens. I'm his mother, and I have never been there for him for even one important event in his life. I want to be there with him when he dies." Her expression was grave and composed. He could see Draco in her face, in the thin angles and planes, the barely but perfectly controlled tension under the surface. "I can do that for you," he said. "Narcissa?" "What?" Her voice was remote. He might have been someone she had never met before. "He knows you love him," Sirius said. "I very much doubt that," she replied, her voice like winter. "I don't think he believes anyone loves him. He's learned to live without it. I don't want him to die that way." She had begun to cry, a silent, effortless crying, but did not lift her hands to wipe the tears away. Sirius took a step forward. "Narcissa, go away, Sirius," she said quietly. "Just go away, please." He went. When Rhys finished telling her story, Ron stood up abruptly and went to stand on the edge of the roof. He could hear her behind him, getting to her feet. "Did my tale upset you?" she asked, pushing her hair out of her small white face. "If it did, then I am sorry. That was not my intention. No, said Ron. No, it wasn't you. I was just thinking that I'm a diviner, so why can't I see what I should do? I wish I was more like Malfoy, but except for being a giant arsehole part. It's easier when only one thing matters to you. No one is that simple, said Rhys, nor do you have many choices. You are a prisoner, after all. There are always choices, said Ron. I could throw myself off the roof right now, splatter myself all over the rocks. You couldn't stop me. You know who wouldn't have much use for me then. Is that what you want to do? Kill yourself? Ron pulled his cloak close about himself and shivered. No, I want to live. Byproduct of the human condition. I wouldn't know, Rhys said. I don't know very much about people. I have only ever known the Malfoys. Ron snorted. If you can call them people, he said. His hand was still at his collar, holding his cloak shut. The brooch the Hermione who was not Hermione had given him, with its intricate design and winking single jewel, pressed against his hand. With a decided motion, he pulled it free and held it in his palm. She had never really loved him. She wasn't even Hermione. Ron drew his hand back then and flung the brooch, hard. It arced out and tumbled down towards the darkness below, striking silver sparks from the air as it fell. Ron watched it go. The wind took his unfastened cloak and pulled it from his shoulders, and it spun away from him as well, caught by the wind's edge, fluttering and falling. All your protections are gone now, said Rhys at his side. If he hadn't known any better, he would have thought she sounded sad. He turned to look at her. She was smaller than he had first thought, and with the wind whipping her black hair across her face, her expression was hard to read. He squared his shoulders resolutely. None of that matters anymore anyway. When they returned to the chess room, Ron saw Voldemort standing in the center of it all, holding something he couldn't quite make out. Whatever it was small, and the Dark Lord was rolling it around his fingers like a marble. He looked towards the stairs, and at Ron as he and Rhys came down. Did you have a nice view of your surroundings, boy? He stood his ground, despite the Dark Lord's stare. Ron. My name is Ron. The thin, attenuated mouth smirked. Not a very malicious name, is it? He looked at him even harder. What has happened to your cloak and your pin? Ron looked down at himself. His clothes were grimy with dirt from the roof, wrinkled and unpleasant from sleeping on the floor. He was fairly sure he smelled. The wind came up, he said. It tore my cloak off and took the pin with it. Voldemort said nothing to this, only looked away from him towards Rhys. Take him back upstairs to the guest chambers. Give him a bath and some more appropriate clothes. Harry, sitting cross-legged on a sofa in the middle of Gryffindor Tower common room, looked at the fireplace with an expression of polite inquiry. What did you want to talk to me about, Sirius? The other man smiled tiredly at his godson. It's about Ron, he said. I didn't say anything before because I didn't want you to worry. And also, I know this isn't your favorite subject at the moment. Harry began, indignation and sheepishness chasing each other across his face. I know all about it, Sirius said. Everyone knows all about it, Harry. which is why I wouldn't normally tell you any of this, but unfortunately it pertains to the discussion now. Ron, he said heavily, has not yet come home to the Barrow. Harry's green eyes opened wide behind his glasses. He hasn't? No, said Sirius, and it's been kept quiet. This afternoon I spoke with our new minister, and it is his considered opinion that Ron has simply run off, legged it for France or some such nonsense. He thinks Ron is ashamed to face you after what he did. Because I'm Harry Potter and I'm dangerously unstable and all that? Harry asked coldly. Pretty much yes, Sirius said. Obviously, something's going on. I need you to think, Harry. When was the last time you saw him? Same as you, Harry said, his eyes blank with tension. Just before the wedding. Sirius sighed. And Lucius didn't say anything to you about Ron when you were with him? Harry shook his head. No. He used that whirlwind charm, and after that, everything's a bit of a blur. Next thing I remember, we were up on the tower. Sirius blinked. You don't remember anything from the casting of the whirlwind charm to the point where you were up on the tower? Harry shook his head. I hadn't thought about it, but no. Sirius expelled a breath. And Draco? If anything important happened, he hasn't mentioned it to me. Could you ask him whenever you see him next? I know that Dumbledore has insisted he stay in the hospital wing for now, and I really agree. I can ask him now, Harry said offhandedly, and Sirius watched with some amazement as his godson's eyes glazed over and his hands uncurled and went loose in his lap. Then Harry's eyes came back into focus, dark lashes sweeping down to cover the expression in them. He says that he doesn't remember being taken upstairs either. Sirius found himself clearing his throat. He wasn't exactly sure why, but the connection between the two of them made him nervous. Well, what do you think happened? I don't know, Harry said absently, as if his mind was still connected, in some capacity, to Draco's. Do you think whatever it was had to do with Ron? Maybe, Sirius said, but I'll have to think about it. Harry shook himself then, almost as if he were coming out of a dream. Then he wrapped his arms around his knees, looking tense. I hate Draco's father, he muttered, staring down at his shoes. I hate his fucking bastard father. Sirius paused for a moment, and then plunged ahead with a question he was fairly sure would not be well received. How is Draco? A spark of green fire between lowered lashes. Harry spoke evenly. Well, I think he's sick of being stuck in the infirmary, and I'm sure he wishes Snape would hurry up with the antidote. But he's fine. They were silent a moment, then Harry continued. I forgot to mention, when we got back here, I found something on the bed in the dormitory, wrapped up like a present. He reached into a pocket of his jeans and drew out what looked like a broken toy. Blinking, Sirius realized it was a chess piece, a knight made of green stone. It was broken in half, as if a knife had cut it. I thought, Harry said, his voice taking on a slightly ragged edge. I thought it was from Draco's father, telling me that my move was over, and that it was his move now. It seemed like something he'd do, but now I don't think it had anything to do with me or Draco at all. Let me have it, Sirius said, and reached out of the fire to collect the chess piece from Harry. The marble was smooth, weighty, and expensive. So, someone sent you a veiled taunt, he said. Lucius, or one of his Death Eater cronies, or even Voldemort himself, said Harry, his voice toneless but intent. But it doesn't make any sense, after everything that's happened. What would the Death Eaters want with Ron? There was a stained glass window above him when he entered the bathroom, and the moonlight came down through it, making the red panes bleed on him. The blue panes weep, and the green planes bathe everything in a poisonous light. In one corner was a bathtub behind a screen, filled with scented water. There were no other windows, but it seemed a small complaint, considering that he had been expecting something a little more like the deepest dungeon under the castle moat, and a little less like a cozy hostel. The first thing Rhys did was order him to undress and pass his clothes out to her through the door. Ron complied, muttering to himself. He was left with nothing to wear but a long silk robe printed all over with gold and red dragons. It had obviously been made for someone shorter, as it barely reached his knees. "I resemble a scarlet woman," he muttered, glaring at his reflection in the gigantic gold-backed mirror that hung opposite the bathtub. "I wonder if this is you-know-who's idea of psychological torture." Later, he would realize that he had underestimated the toll that the few hours spent badly frightened, with little sleep and less food, coupled with the immense stress of his sudden visions, would take on his body and mind. After he bathed, he put his robe back on and returned to the quarters Rhys had brought him to, which were extremely well appointed. The thick rugs covered the stone floor, and incense smoked in a gold clawed-footed brazier next to the four-poster bed, where food had been placed on the table near it. Rhys herself was stretched, cat-like, along a nearby velvet chaise. She was wearing an apple-green outfit that was transparent and barely held together with black ribbons, and a pair of thigh-high stockings. "Hello, darling," she said. "Did you have a nice respite?" "Don't call me pet names," Ron muttered. "We're not friends." "I never said anything about wanting to be friends with you," she said, with a throaty chuckle, and stood up from the bed to take a step closer to him, swaying as she walked. He had noticed it before, as if her tendons were made of elastic. The candlelight threw a shiny net over her black hair, and her skin glowed through her thin clothes. Ron half closed his eyes. "Don't," he said. "I know what you're trying to do." "I just want you to help me pick out what I should wear for tomorrow," she said, her low voice vibrating through his bones. "I don't care what you wear." She smiled and pushed her hair back. "You can use me however you like. Or would you rather I be little Miss Parkinson? You can call me all the names in the book, and maybe we'll end up shagging anyway." "Stop it, Rhys," Ron said, as his eyes flew open, his voice taking on a sharp and dangerous tone. "Or what?" she asked coolly. "Or I'll tell you your future," he hissed. Rhys gave a sharp little intake of breath at that. Only the eyes were murderous. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't try to seduce me, then," Ron said. "It might be all the comfort you get," she said. "False comfort is better than none." "I don't want it," he said. She gave him an angry look, but there was something else underneath it as well. Grudging respect. "No illusions, then?" she said. "None," said Ron. "Very well," she said. "Get some sleep, little diviner, and when you see what tomorrow brings, you'll wish you had taken my offer." The brightly colored lights strung through the hospital wing cast a soft and multicolored glow over everything. Ginny, demurely seated on one of the adjacent beds, was busy sipping a cup of hot cocoa Harry had brought up from the kitchens. Hermione was seated in one of the window sills with a stack of books and parchments on her lap, acutely absorbed in research. And Draco was currently engaged in resolutely pulling all the feathers out of an overstuffed pillow Madame Pomfrey had given him. Tiny white fluffs were now tangled in his fair hair and sticking to his eyelashes, sifting down onto the shoulders of his blue silk pajamas. "Will you stop doing that?" said Ginny, and set her cup down resolutely on the adjacent table. "You are ruining that pillow." "It was tubby," Draco said, yanking out another handful of feathers and tossing them into the air. "I can't sleep on tubby pillows." Ginny snorted. "Spoiled," she said succinctly. Draco grinned at her through an obscuring rain of feathers. Ginny couldn't help but smile back, but knew that it must have looked sad. Draco had been in the infirmary now for almost 2 days, ever since they had arrived back at Hogwarts. They took it in shifts to sit with him, and Ginny had assumed Draco was being forced to stay on lockdown by Madame Pomfrey, but now she was beginning to wonder. He really seemed to be, well, enjoying himself wasn't it exactly, but he wasn't moping around either. His old playfulness had come back, and he mercilessly teased or flirted with everyone who came near him. He was behaving like someone recovering from a terrible illness, when after all, the opposite was true. "You know, I talked to Madame Pomfrey," Ginny said. "She said there isn't any reason that you have to stay in bed. If you're careful, and you don't exert yourself, you can get up and go back to your dormitory. And Hermione said Snape is working on your antidote, and has found every ingredient but 2. But I'm sure he'll find the others either today or tomorrow at the latest." "My pillow is flat," Draco said sadly, examining the wreckage he had created. "Did you hear me, Draco?" "Seldom, if ever," he replied, "but therein lies your charm." Ginny gave him a hard stare. "Wouldn't you rather go back to your own bed?" "No," Draco said in a decided manner. "There's no one there to entertain me, and that's boring." "You just enjoy lolling about, having everyone wait on you and bring you sandwiches," Ginny said. "But I, for one, am not going to be peeling big piles of grapes or fanning you with a handkerchief." In response, Draco flushed a delicate and indignant shade of mauve. "I do not make people bring me sandwiches." As if on cue, the curtains around the bed were drawn back, and Ginny twisted around to see Harry at the bed's foot, a covered plate in his hand. "I brought you a sandwich," he said, and handed the plate to Draco. Ginny shot Draco a look that clearly said, "I told you so," which he studiously ignored. "It's peanut butter," said Harry. Draco paused. "Oh. You don't like peanut butter?" Harry asked, raising an eyebrow. "I like it fine," Draco said. "It's just, well, it's a bit..." "Plebeian?" asked Ginny, who had gone back to sipping her beverage. "Sticky," said Draco woefully. "Oh, for goodness sake," said Hermione from across the room. "It's all right," Harry said, and reached out to take the plate back. "I'll get you something else." "No, don't bother. I'll eat it. Perhaps the peanut butter will give me strength." "Hand me the plate, Malfoy." A sudden obstinacy seemed to strike Draco, and he clung to the plate as if it were a departing loved one. "No," he said. Harry hissed an exasperated breath through his teeth, and Draco allowed his eyes to grow huge and woeful. "It's not your fault I don't like peanut butter." "Well, I don't want you to eat it because you feel like you have to. Maybe I want to, but you don't want to. I might have changed my mind." Harry's eyes flashed. "Give me the plate, Malfoy." "No," Draco said. This might have continued for some time, had Ginny not reached forward, yanked the plate out of Draco's hand, and stuffed the peanut butter sandwich into her own mouth. Harry raised both eyebrows now, but remained silent. Draco slowly lowered his hands to the coverlet, wide-eyed. "I told you were spoiled," she said around a mouthful of sandwich. Harry continued to stare, and Hermione blew out a breath. "Do you feel better now?" she asked Draco in a tone that hinted at irritation. Draco looked slightly sheepish. "I do, a bit." "Having girls stuff sandwiches into their mouths makes you feel better?" Harry asked. "I can't help it," said Draco. "I may be ill, but I'm still callous and strange." "Mm-hmm," said Ginny after she had swallowed. Then she stood up and took Harry by the arm. "Come on," she said. "Let's go get something our ailing prince will consume without complaint." Harry agreed with a slightly distracted air, and let Ginny drag him away. "Don't say it," Draco said, as soon as the infirmary door had closed behind them. "Say what?" Hermione asked from her place at the window. "That Harry is only fetching you sandwiches because he doesn't know what else to do?" "Yes, that," Draco said quietly. The affected air of haughty weariness had left him, replaced by grave seriousness. "And I'd rather he'd do something else, honestly. But there's nothing to do. It's not like he can crawl inside my veins and kill the poison before it kills me." "You're not going to die," Hermione corrected him sharply. "I am," he said. "You know I—" Thwack! Draco broke off as one of her many books hit him square in the chest. "Don't you ever, ever, ever say that again," Hermione said, her voice trembling. "Don't you ever—" He stared at her. In his white face, his eyes were the color of rain, luminous but leaden. All his previous play-acting had hardly moved Hermione's heart. But this Draco, eyes dark with haunted apprehension, made her ache inside. She hated the poison that seemed to burn away all impurities from skin and hair and eyes, turning it all to flaring crystal, lighting the roses of fever in his pale cheeks, paring away all excess flesh from the lovely arcing bones of chin and jaw. He had never been this eerily beautiful before, and it bothered and upset her. "I won't then," he said, "if you ask it of me." "Oh, Draco," she said, as a sudden weariness came over her, and she hugged her arms about herself, feeling chilled. "You make everyone you meet either love you or hate you, and sometimes I wonder which is worse." A faint smile touched the edges of his mouth. "A keenly felt observation," he said. "Thank you." "Take Blaise, for instance," Hermione continued, her tone glum. "Paying her to date you. That's just unethical. I mean, how do you justify an arrangement like that? It would be one thing if it was just for show, but you actually did things with her, didn't you?" "Define things," said Draco. "You mean, did we occasionally take off our clothes and—" "Yes!" Hermione interrupted hastily. "And please spare me the details." Draco crossed his arms behind his head and arched his back like a cat in sunshine. "Well, what did you expect me to do? Realistically speaking, I'm 17 years old, you know. I ought to be having sex with everything that has legs and isn't a table. So I messed about with Blaise a bit. And I'd like to point out that whatever we did together isn't any of your business, really. She wasn't exactly the person I would have chosen for my first time," he said a little more quietly. "But it is what it is." Hermione knew he didn't understand, and probably never would understand, that what he had done to Blaise was wrong, so she decided to drop it. With an inward sense of trepidation, she reached up and unclipped the barrette that Blaze had given to her and held it in her hand. Draco's expression changed to one of complete confusion as he looked at her palm. Blaze's barrette? What the bloody...
She gave it to me the other night,
Hermione said shortly. Draco looked flabbergasted. She... What? When? How? Hermione smirked, despite herself.
Look, she just did, okay? She said it had protective magic of some sort. I don't know what kind. It looks like a perfectly ordinary barrette to me.
The basilisk scales, actually, Draco said absently. Baby basilisk scales. There was a custom among pure-blood families, generations ago, to wear ornaments containing bits of dark creatures. Hellhound teeth, dragon blood pendants, werewolf bones. My signet ring even has a griffin blood in the stone.
Well, she seems sincere about wanting me to have it,
Hermione said. Draco smiled slyly at her, but before he could speak, the door opened, and Harry and Ginny came back into the room, both looking smug. And it was no wonder, as they were accompanied by at least 9 house elves, all carrying plates, bowls, and platters. Draco burst out laughing.
Oh, honestly,
said Hermione, and threw up her hands in despair.
I'm going to the library. I assume you two plan to stay here and feed Draco by hand like Nubian slaves?
Actually, I was going to pole dance for him, said Ginny mildly, but your plan sounds like more fun. Your first idea sounds much better, said Draco with a sly grin. Hermione rolled her eyes, then looked at Harry, who seemed to be suppressing a smile. He caught her eye, and it was gone in an instant. She felt her heart sink ever so slightly.
I'll let you know if I find anything,
she said, and left, her books and parchments clutched to her chest. As soon as Rhys had left, Ron had attacked the food that had been left to him with relish, and when he went to bed, he fell into a profound, death-like sleep. He had no dreams at all. When he awoke the next day, he wasn't surprised to see Rhys standing over him. I brought your clothes, she said without preamble, waving one slim hand to what looked like a stack of folded fabric on the table next to the bed. The Dark Lord insisted. Ron sat up and looked at her resentfully. I'm not getting changed with you watching. Then you're not getting changed at all. The Dark Lord asked me to stay here and make sure you dress properly. Anyway, it isn't as if I haven't seen it all already. Blushing furiously, Ron snatched up the clothes and quickly retreated to the other side of the room to get dressed, his back turned, ignoring Rhys's taunting laugh. Keep your eyes closed, he snapped, positive she was peeking over her shoulder at him. I promise you, she purred. I can't see a thing. The clothes were complicated, not quite like any he had seen before. The trousers were made from very thick, supple material. Then there was a dark wool shirt and a long cloak that went on over the whole thing. The cloak itself was heavy, dark blue velvet, with a gilt lining and fastened in front with a number of complicated brass clasps. He pulled it a little tighter around himself and crossed the room to look at his reflection in the mirror, expecting that he looked ridiculous. He paused, staring at himself. The dark blue cloak brought out the color of his eyes and hair, and the boots made him look even taller. Of course, his ears still stuck out, but thanks to the cut of the clothes, the rest of him looked, well, elegant. Not so much skinny as slender. Even his posture was better. He had never understood why Draco spent so much on clothes, but it was beginning to make sense now. Ron leaned against the back of a nearby chair gazing at himself through lowered eyelids, then frowned. Draping himself seductively over furniture and sneering did not have the effect of making him look like Draco. It had the effect of making him look like an enormous prat. It appeared that only worked on willowy blonde aristocrats with languid eyes and a voice that sounded like galleons clinking together, and not on red-headed sons of a minor public official from Ottery St. Catchpole. A soft chuckle made him turn around, and he was not at all surprised to see Rhys standing behind him, twirling a ribbon from her corset in between her long fingers. "You like how you look?" she asked. "I look all right," said Ron. "More than all right, I should think," she said. "Now follow me." And he did, out the door and down the stairs, feeling a sense of trepidation with every step. Back in the chess room, Ron was surprised to see that it had been altered to something else entirely. For the first time, he noticed how circular the chamber was, with its walls tapering to a conical ceiling whose apex was open to the sky now, through which faint morning light poured from above, and the smell of dew wafted down. The floor was bare, polished green stone, swirled through with rococo designs. A huge five-pointed star had been drawn upon the center of the floor in some kind of reddish-black fluid that Ron hoped was paint. Objects had also been set at points of the star: a mirror, a dagger, a scabbard. But something was missing. Where was the cup that Hermione had talked about? As soon as he hit the landing, Ron saw Voldemort and Lucius, who was wearing an ornate-looking eye patch over his left eye. Rookwood, and a fourth unknown man, also stood in the middle of the room. Evidently, they were all awaiting his arrival. Upon seeing him, Voldemort turned to the strange man.
"Take hold of the diviner," he said. "He must be prepared for the ritual."
"Ritual?" Ron asked in a hollow sort of voice, as a stranger strode forward and took hold of his arm. He was astonished at the strength of him. The grip on his arms felt like hot bands of iron that were contracting around his skin. Voldemort eyed Ron thoughtfully, then glanced at the strange man.
"Be careful with him, Gabriel," he said languidly. "I don't want his body spoiled. Remember, it's only his blood I require in this moment."
The man named Gabriel glanced at Ron with slight interest. "Will the ceremony require all his blood?" he asked, and Ron balked to see that Gabriel had fangs. Not just sharply pointed canines, but actual fangs. A vampire.
"No,"
said Voldemort, his tone indifferent.
"but that doesn't mean I don't want you to be careful. Rookwood, bring me the chains. I wouldn't want our diviner to struggle too much."
"Master," Rookwood said, with a nasty smile, and retreated to somewhere in the room. Ron heard the clanking of metal on metal, and began to struggle in Gabriel's grip. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," said the vampire low in his ear. "The Dark Lord may not want me to hurt you, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I helped myself to a pint or two for your insolence. You are little more than prey to me, boy. Remember that." Ron stopped struggling at this, and was little more than a limp husk as Gabriel hauled him to the middle of the pentagram, and Rookwood bound his hands and feet to the stone floor. And when his blood was drawn, just a prick from his left index finger, he barely felt it. All his thoughts had peeled down to Harry, and how, at any other time, he would have come storming into this castle to save him. But Harry would never come now, would never risk his life for someone who had betrayed him the way he had. This ceremony would mean his death, and everyone had abandoned him to it. It was truly over. As Ron's blood splattered down onto the floor in front of the Dark Lord, who had come to stand in front of him, it sizzled as it touched the lines of the pentagram, and they began to glow, the whole area inside the sigil shimmering with green light. It was almost beautiful, even more so as the mirror, the dagger, and scabbard began to glow with fierce brilliance. And in that moment, Ron understood at last what the final ingredient actually was. "It's me," he thought in a panic. "I'm the cup. No, I'm the vessel." Voldemort smiled like a knife's edge as he caught the look on the boy's face.
"Now you understand, don't you, little diviner? You are what I needed to make my ascension complete. With your powers, I will be all-knowing, all-seeing, and not even the great Harry Potter will be able to stop me."
Then he raised his arms to the sky, clearly visible through the open ceiling of the chamber, and began to chant.
"Fulmen evoca, calis invinti, extium repta, extium.
As he chanted, the strange light inside the pentagram turned into a fine silvery mist that rose from the floor, half cloaking the figures inside the five-pointed star. It drifted across the floor of the chamber, winding around the legs of both Voldemort and Ron. It felt like cold fingers and tasted like metallic ink and old parchment. Ron stiffened in alarm as the mist began to swirl, faster and faster. It whispered softly as it brushed against his face, and was not unlike being surrounded by fluttering birds. The metallic scent in the air was stronger than ever, and Ron tried to lean his body away from it, but it was no use. The whirl of mist had formed a solid wall against him. The silver shimmer that had vanished when he looked at it had returned, barely visible beyond the white blur. He slitted his eyes to half-moons to try and black out the dizziness he felt, when suddenly he saw a shape outline itself against the mist. For a moment he thought it was Harry, for it had the shape of a boy, tall and slender. But the eyes that burned through all that whiteness were not green, but scarlet red flames. A scream was building up in his chest, but before it could leave his throat, the shape seemed to melt and flow towards him through the air like water. There was a terrible wail, followed by a triumphant laugh, and something struck him with the force of a tidal wave, and blackness erased his vision.
"Harry!"
A voice, urgent and anxious-sounding, cut across the room, interrupting the conversation being had by himself, Draco, and Ginny, which had involved the sleazy weasel. Harry twisted around and looked up in surprise. Hermione stood in the infirmary doorway, carrying a sheaf of parchment in her hands. Her face was as white as her dress. It was Ginny who asked, "What is it, Hermione?"
"It's about Ron,"
she said, and stepped into the room, and the door closed behind her. Her eyes were large and dark in her pale face. They swung beseechingly towards Harry as she spoke.
"I'm afraid. I found out. Harry, I think."
She took a deep breath and said in a steadier voice,
"I think I know what Lucius would want with him."
Harry stood up slowly.
"What?" "It's the last part of the 4 worthy objects spell," Hermione said. Remember how I said the last part of the spell requires a wizard's life's blood?
Harry nodded. Yeah, but I thought you said... it said it required a dark wizard's life's blood. Ron's not a dark wizard. Even if he wanted to be, he isn't old enough to be one that was any good. Hermione nodded.
The word is conjurator. It means a powerful dark wizard, but it means something else as well.
Harry resisted the urge to reach out and grab onto something for support. It was Draco who spoke, asking the question to which Harry did not want the answer. What else does it mean? Hermione bit her lip.
It means diviner, she said.
But, Harry said blankly, but Ron, he's hardly a diviner at all. He's never divined anything. You don't know that, said Draco, trying to keep his voice as even and emotionless as possible. It was difficult. For a moment, Harry's eyes sparked, their green color suddenly as bright as smashed window glass. Then he nodded. You're right. It's just... Still, Draco continued when Harry faltered. It seems like if you-know-who wanted a diviner, he could have found someone other than Weasley, he said. I won't claim that hurting you wouldn't have been an attractive side benefit for him. He does hate you.
But don't you think he's like bait or something?
Ginny asked from her place on the bed. If he was just bait, then why go through so much effort to make Harry hate him? Said Draco, raising his eyes to look at her. I don't hate Ron, said Harry. Hermione almost jumped when he said this, and stared at him.
You don't?
He shook his head. No, I hate what he did, but I thought I hated him, but I don't actually think I have it in me to do so. Draco felt something inside him twist slightly. He knew, without needing a fuller explanation, what Harry meant. Knew that Harry could not really understand what had happened, but would forgive Ron anyway. And it was so like Harry, wasn't it? To be able to forgive without needing to understand. I'll say this for whoever orchestrated the whole situation, he said remotely. They certainly wanted you to hate him. Why do you think that is? So I wouldn't go after him when he disappeared, Harry said immediately, having thought about this already. But they must know it's the sort of thing I would do. Go barreling after him, which doesn't make any sense, because they know I won't leave now, he said.
Why not?
Hermione asked. Because I won't go while Draco's dying, Harry said. There was a pregnant pause. You've never admitted that I was dying before, Draco said into the silence.
Because you're not, Hermione snapped. Snape said he had most of the ingredients for the antidote identified.
And until he has them all, Harry added obstinately, I won't leave. Plus, I don't even know where to start looking for Ron right now. I have to figure that part out first.
Speaking of the antidote, Ginny interjected softly, didn't one of you say the other day that Snape had asked you to help him with or something this morning?
Oh, bugger! Wailed Hermione. We forgot! Harry, he's going to kill us if we don't show now! Draco chuckled lightly, but Harry was already moving across the room at lightning speed. Sure, he said to their retreating backs. Just feed me sandwiches, then bail out the first thing in the morning. Shut up, Malfoy, said Harry, running his hands through his hair in an anxious manner. Stay in bed, and if you need anything, Ginny is right there. Go away, Potter, said Draco. I'll see you later. When he opened his eyes, The smell of electric energy was as strong in the room as smoke after a fire. His legs buckled momentarily under him. Oh, it was strange to be young again, and in possession of all those accoutrements of physical existence. Eyes and mouth and limbs that moved, a heart that beat, and veins that coursed with new blood. When he first read about this ritual, he had not expected it to work. But when the plan had been devised to take this body, his decision had been immediate. It was a fine body, in excellent shape, well made, slender and strong, not unlike the one he'd had himself at 17, although this one had arms lightly downed with red hair instead of black, a choir boy face, and blue eyes like bits torn out of a midsummer sky. He glanced around the room in a half-daze. In front of him was a withered body, crumpled as old snakeskin, ruined. This did not bother him. Having been released from it, he had no more use for it.
"My lord,"
said a voice beside him now, and he looked over and saw Lucius Malfoy standing not too far away, looking wrung out but expectant.
"Has the ritual taken effect?"
For a moment he did not speak, but began to take stock of the mind he now inhabited. He knew that Ron's pale skin would burn in summer if he stayed out in the sun too long. He knew this, and could not have said how he knew. It was not his memory, after all, and completely inorganic to himself. He knew it the way he knew that this boy was 17 years old, that he liked Quidditch, that he loved his parents and siblings, that he was a Gryffindor with a strong heart that loved with a fierceness that made the Dark Lord loathe the inner workings of his host's thoughts immediately. He tapped harder at Ron's memories, trying to pull up what he knew of Harry Potter, but something seemed to be preventing him. A solid wall as hard and immovable as dragon scales seemed to assail his mind, and a slight headache began to form behind his eyes. As his servants waited with bated breath for him to speak, he turned those thoughts aside and stood, trying to make sense of the chaotic whirl of memories that vied for attention inside his overcrowded brain. Names and faces came and went behind his eyes. Draco Malfoy, whom he hated, but who looked like a more perfect version of his father in childhood. Ron's sister, Ginny Weasley, who was his best confidant after Harry, and Hermione Granger, her rosy sunflower face crowned by all that bushy hair. Oh, Hermione he knew. Even more interestingly, Ron seemed to be in love with her. He felt the sickly adoration as a pain beneath his ribs, and grinned at it, a wolf grin. Oh yes, Ron loved her so very much that he had unknowingly betrayed his best friend. How he must yearn to have done something like that. Still grinning, he looked over at Lucius and said at last, "It worked better than I could have anticipated, Lucius. Now, kindly free me from these bonds. I'm feeling nostalgic, and there's one place I would like to visit now more than anywhere else."
"And where is that, my lord?"
Lucius asked with some surprise. The red-headed boy smiled.
"Why, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, of course."
When they arrived in the potions dungeon, Snape was there, industriously crushing ashwinder eggs with a small mortar and pedestal.
"You two are late,"
he said in a deadly quiet voice, and didn't look up as they came in.
"I hope you have a very good reason as to why."
"We were with Draco,"
Hermione said, puffing a little from running down to the potions room.
"I see,"
said Snape coldly. So, you must think that the antidote to the poison will be so easy to find that I don't need your assistance in order to find it. Harry opened his mouth to make a nasty remark, but Hermione gripped his wrist and he subsided.
"We're truly sorry, Professor," she said, hoping she sounded contrite. "Please forgive us. We want to help, but we also have a missing friend to worry about. Surely you can understand how taxing it is to handle both."
Snape didn't say anything for a moment, but finally looked up at the two of them. Then he stood up from the table and pointed to the chair. "Sit," he said curtly. "There are notes here on the table as to what I have been working on. I'm going into my storeroom to take stock of ingredients, and I expect you to have completed the work by the time I get back." And he swept from the room, pushing past both of them and slamming the door shut behind him. In the stunned silence that followed, Hermione said,
"I don't think I've ever seen Snape so furious."
"He's a wanker," Harry said succinctly, and grabbed a nearby chair and moved it next to the one Snape had just recently vacated. "The way he acts, you think it was a bad thing that we spend so much time in the infirmary." Hermione joined him a moment later and began to pick up where the potions master left off.
"Well, it isn't exactly normal," she said.
"Maybe not," he returned, "but at least if we're with him, then nothing bad can happen."
"You mean you think he can't die with us watching?"
Hermione replied evenly. Harry looked down, his long eyelashes brushing the tops of his cheekbones. "Well, you sure know how to make it sound stupid."
Hermione sighed. "I don't know," she said. "If anyone could keep him alive through sheer force of will, it'd be you, Harry."
Harry passed her a jar of mandrake leaves, and when he spoke again, his voice was constricted. "I sometimes feel as if that polyjuice potion hammered these sharp hooks into me, hooks attached to a cord, and on the other end of the cord are more hooks, and they're attached to Draco. That cord feels flexible and infinitely long, and however far apart we are, it connects us. Most of the time I don't think about it. It's part of me now, and who I am. But sometimes I look at him and I..."
"And you what?"
Hermione asked, her voice very gentle. "And I can see where the hooks go into him," Harry said, "where they cut and make him bleed. And I think, what has this done to him? To me? To both of us? Maybe we were better off when we hated each other."
"If you hated each other, you wouldn't care that he was dying now,"
Hermione returned, half indignant and half bewildered. This was not like Harry. He did not think or speak figuratively. He saw things as they were. He did not have visions of invisible cords and sharp hooks that drew blood from unresisting flesh. She shuddered. Harry didn't say anything after that, and they lapsed into an easy silence. For several minutes they worked, both hoping and not hoping that Snape would return. On the upside, however, Harry was enjoying the time with Hermione. Given the current state of their non-relationship, it seemed something of a guilty pleasure, but there it was. He wasn't sure how helpful he was being, but it was pleasant to be around her nonetheless. He liked watching her work, crouched in series over a low burning flame, adding ingredients to a small cauldron, liked the way she pushed her hair back while she worked, and finally, with a scrunched-up face of despair, wound it in a bun atop her head and thrust a quill through it. "That never works," Harry pointed out. "Your hair always falls down anyway." Said Hermione, or something very like it.
Hand me the newt's blood. Not that I think there's any newt's blood involved here, but the notes do say to try everything.
Wordlessly, Harry pushed the vial of blood towards her. As he did so, he heard her voice, sounding surprised and more than a little nervous.
Harry?
She said slowly. He looked over at her, surprised by her tone.
What?
He said.
Is that...
He followed her gaze, and when he realized what she was looking at, he jumped in surprise and tried to pull his sleeve down. It did no good, however. She'd seen the watch around his wrist, its cracked face reflecting the light of the cauldron fire. Hermione went back to work again, her scarlet cheeks the only sign of her agitation. A few moments of tense silence passed. Then finally he spoke. "Just ask me," he said in a resigned tone.
I haven't got anything to ask you, Hermione said tightly. You want to wear that watch? It's your business. It's your watch. Although I don't know where you could have gotten it, because the last time I saw it, it was in...
She broke off then, her cheeks the color of the vial of Newt's blood. "Was in where, Hermione?" he asked.
Room spot eyes, please, she said tensely.
"If you must know, Draco was the one who—"
Can I have the room spot eyes, or am I going to have to get them myself? She interrupted.
His mind suddenly awhirl, Harry absently handed her a tall glass jar.
Harry,
Hermione wailed.
These are bats' toes.
"Sorry," Harry said. The last time he had been in London, the sky had been burning. Now it was not. At the Muggle orphanage, he had stood on the roof with the other children, and in the distance had seen the cities crumble to ashes. They had cried around him, saying it was the end of the world. He had smiled to himself, pitying them. They knew only one world. He knew more. The sky had never burned in Diagon Alley, of course, but had been dark all day and night because of the cloaking charms the Ministry used to protect themselves against German aerial attacks. Once he had brushed up against a soldier, home on leave in a crowded Muggle street. He had murmured "Vice Fiscus" under his breath, and the images of war and death had poured into his mind like water from a broken dam. He saw men dying on the beaches and in holes in the ground. They fell from the air like burst flowers of fire. They died calling for their mothers, and, more often, they died calling for water. They crawled in their own blood and tore at their own skin. And he had known then, with a cold, uncompassionate clarity, that this would never happen to him. He would make sure of it. He would never die. Death was interesting to him, in a distant sort of way. The artistry of it, the mechanics, the complex engines of life running down and stopping all in a single instant. But he wanted no part of it. It was too commonplace, too ordinary, too human. He looked around him now, at the few people hurrying back and forth along the alley under the bright winter sun. This was a weak generation, he thought. A generation unused to trial or hardship. A generation who idealized a wisp of a boy whose greatest achievement had, apparently, been failing to die. They would be easy pickings. A small smile twisted the corner of his mouth as he entered the leaky cauldron, and he paused inside the entryway to look at himself in the mirror over the door, and wondered how long it would be before that reflected face no longer gave him a moment of startled pause. A truly uncomplicated face, if ever there was one. He fought down a ripple of mirth. Inside the leaky cauldron, he ordered a mug of butterbeer and took a seat by the fireplace in a shadowed corner where he would not be seen. He sat with his hood up, thinking. He had told Lucius that he wanted to make this journey alone. After all, it would be very suspicious for him to be seen in the company of a Malfoy, knowing as he did that the Weasley family despised them with a fiery passion. He needed time. Time to concoct a plan. It was imperative now that the mystery of Ron's disappearance hold as long as possible. That meant that no one should come looking for him, and that meant that he would have to be as discreet as possible in the coming days. Still concentrating, he flicked idly through Ron's memories as though they were a stack of randomly arranged photographs that fluttered quickly by. Images would appear and disappear, with no apparent importance attached to their order or progress, until, finally, he landed on one memory in particular. Ron was sitting on the bed in the Gryffindor dorm room, looking down at some strange map, over the surface of which names of various people came and went down the hallways, like scurrying ants over the parchment. "You mean to say," said the voice of Ron in his head, "that there are secret passageways all over this map, that leading out of the castle? God blimey! Why did Fred and George never tell me?" There was a sound of bright laughter somewhere in the room, and a voice replied, "I'm sure they would have let you know at some point, Ron. Fred and George aren't that vindictive." The voice of Ron snorted and looked up to wherever the other voice was standing, but in his mind's eye he could see only a blurry shadow of somebody standing by the window. Who was there? But the more he tried to see, the blurrier the shadow became. Frustrated, he turned Ron's mind back to the map on the bed and began to scan it for clues. And there, just on the fringes of memory, it came to him like a shot. The statue of the One-Eyed Witch. A way into Hogwarts without being detected. A wicked smile began to curl the edges of his mouth once more. "Well, well, well," he thought. "How very convenient." It was getting late, and Harry and Hermione had been working non-stop for hours. By the time Snape returned, he made clear the time and suggested that Hermione go and get something to eat. Gratefully, Hermione began to put things away, and when she was finished, Harry turned to leave with her. "Not you, Potter," Snape said in a voice that held all the warmth of an Arctic blast. "You will stay here and speak with me." Hermione cast a furtive glance at Harry, but he jerked his chin towards the door. "It's all right," he said in a whisper. "I'll catch up with you later." Looking concerned, she nodded and left the room, shutting the door firmly behind her. Reluctantly, Harry turned back to face Snape. He suspected, on some level, that the potions master was still livid with both of them for showing up late, and in his usual fashion was going to take it out on him. He opened his mouth to give an apology, anything that would get him out of this room and down to the Great Hall for supper. But Snape spoke first. "There is no need to fabricate an apology, Potter," he said smoothly, "or any other half-concocted speech you have forming in your head. I don't want to hear it." Harry closed his mouth, swallowing the words that had been on the tip of his tongue. Agitated, he shoved his hands in his pockets and regarded Snape with indifference. He hoped it hid the loathing he felt deep inside, which twisted like a snake. "If you don't want me to apologize, then why do I need to stay?" Snape's lip curled almost imperceptibly. "Typical of you, Potter, to assume that I would want you to stay for anything. But I thought you should be made aware of the symptoms of the poison, which Miss Granger has apparently decided that she didn't want to burden your precious mind with." Suddenly, Harry found that he couldn't quite get enough air into his lungs. Something seemed to be compressing his ribcage. "The symptoms are as follows," continued Snape, now in his driest classroom voice. "Constant pain, lassitude and weakness at first, followed by loss of balance and coordination. As the toxins break down his musculature, his magical ability will suffer. He is already experiencing some dimness of his vision. Soon enough, he will be blind." Harry gagged as a wave of nausea so intense it was nearly pain rose up and over him. The tabletop he was staring at seemed to explode in 1,000 dizzying flecks of color, all flying apart. "After the loss of sight, things will progress rapidly," continued Snape, his voice flat with lethal finality. "He'll have greater trouble staying alert until eventually he'll collapse into a coma. From that point, death will arrive inevitably within a matter of days. Perhaps he'll be around to see it, but it won't matter. He won't know you're there, and then he'll die." His recitation finished, Snape gave him a long, inscrutable look. Harry blinked away the dizziness he felt, and swallowed. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, hearing the weakness in his own voice. "You mean you never thought about it?" Snape said harshly. "How long did it take you to notice he was ill? I, myself, suspected it for some time now. Where have you been looking, Potter, that you didn't see it? Not at Draco, surely. And now I suspect that you plan to drag him after you on some wild goose chase after you know who." "No!" he shouted fiercely. "No. I told him I would wait until he was better. I would never leave him while he was dying. What more do you want from me?" Snape stood still for a moment, looking at Harry. "I plan on finding the antidote," he said at last, his voice cool and for the first time not ungentle. "But until then, I think you should go away, Potter. Without Draco. This final battle, whatever it is your battle. If your other friends are stupid enough to come with you, that is their lookout. But it will be a long time until Draco is entirely well again, and he needs rest. He needs to be left alone. Since he was born, he has been someone else's puppet, a contrivance to be played with and put to use. Cut your ties with him, and let him decide what he wants. Do that, and I might perhaps begin to believe that you are not like your father." Harry's fingers tightened into fists inside his pocket. "My father was brave and kind and honorable," he said slowly. Snape's thin lips curled in disgust. "Your father was a complacent moron," he said, his voice like a dagger. "He assumed that because everyone loved him that he deserved that love. And where is everyone who loved him now? Dead, that's where." "None of that was my father's fault," Harry flung back, incensed. "He didn't ask for any of this to happen." "Oh, didn't he?" Snape sneered, his eyes like black coals. Harry couldn't believe his ears. Snape had said horrible things to him before, dozens of times, but never anything quite like this. He stared at the potions master, trying to form a response. "All right," he said, and was startled by the clarity and steadiness of his own voice. "I'll do what you ask. I'll leave." Snape looked taken aback, so much so that any other time Harry would have been pleased. "It will hardly be easy," he said after a moment. "I don't care about easy," Harry said, barely aware of what he was saying. "Find the antidote. I can't do that. Nobody else can. You have to—" He broke off, feeling the beat of his own heart, hard and painful, against the inside of his ribs. "I don't care what you think of me. I don't think much of you, personally. But I'll go." He raised his chin and looked steadily at Snape one last time. And for the first time in their long, unpleasant acquaintance, Snape looked away first. Harry turned away, half expecting Snape to call out to him as he went across the room to the dungeon door, where he opened it and went through. But Snape was silent. Harry shut the door behind him and made it almost halfway down the corridor before he had to run to the nearest window. He pushed it open and was violently and desolately sick into the cold winter air outside. Sunset came creeping slowly into the infirmary like blood spilling into water, tinting the air scarlet. The west wall of the windows looked out onto a rosy grey sky chased with the last threads of clouds, streaked gold and black, a sky full of spangles and tinder. One of the loveliest sunsets Harry had ever seen, but he barely looked at it. He had stopped in the center of the room upon coming in, and now stood where he was, letting the bloody light coalesce around him. All the beds in the room were bare, except the one Draco lay on, a huddled shadow in the dimming light. The air was cool, but not cold, and the faint wind whispered to Harry of his own shortcomings, failures, and blindness. He wanted Hermione, wanted her with him badly, but how could he tell her what Snape had just said? He wanted Ron, but Ron was gone, and that was his fault too. He wanted Sirius, but Sirius would try to prevent him from doing what he had to do. He wanted his parents, a wanting so bad that he forced himself to stand in the middle of the room without moving until he was entirely sure that he could cross it. But they were dead, and there was nothing he could do about it. The light had darkened, and he found himself standing over Draco's bed and looking down at the boy who was lying in it, asleep. He knelt slowly next to the bed and put his elbows on the mattress. Somehow, he felt that this moment was terribly important, that some great decision was about to be made or unmade inside him. Draco stirred slightly, and Harry shrank back, but he was only settling himself more deeply into the cushions. Harry sat where he was for a moment. He had never begged help from fate or chance, but now it felt more important than it ever had in the past. Let Snape find the antidote, he thought savagely. I'll keep the promise I made. I will go after Voldemort myself and destroy him. A sudden light flared behind Harry, and he jerked his head up in surprise, and saw there was the infirmary torches, having lit themselves all at once in preparation for the evening. The room was suddenly bright with a warm, ochre glow. Harry blinked against it, half blinded, and heard the creak of the bed as Draco shifted and turned over, grabbing his pillow to block the light. The pillow slid off the other boy's head, and a single gray eye blinked curiously, half hidden by the tangle of white blonde hair that appeared over the crook of Draco's arm. Potter? That you? His voice was thick with sleep, lacking its usual crystalline delicacy. Yeah, said Harry, not seeing how a denial in this case would get him anywhere. Oh, Draco blinked at him again.
Everything all right?
Harry took a deep breath. Just came by to see if you wanted me to bring you any supper, he lied. Draco gave a slight shake of his head.
No, too tired,
he said, and behind his soft, muffled tones, Harry heard Snape's voice hissing at him. Weakness, lassitude, exhaustion.
I'm sorry I woke you up,
Harry said tonelessly. Go back to sleep. Draco said, and rolled over onto his back with a pillow clutched in his arms. Harry looked at him for a moment, then turned his back to the bed and looped his arms around his knees. He did not know how long he sat there, long enough for his legs to begin to cramp from the cold stone floor, long enough for the darkness outside the windows to become complete, and for the torches to begin to dim as the night gathered around the castle. He sat there, half listening to the sound of Draco's breathing, so lost in thought that it took him a moment to realize that someone was coming. Instinctively, Harry scrambled to his feet and went to duck behind Madame Pomfrey's prep table and knelt there, breathless and utterly motionless, as the doors opened and 2 sets of footsteps approached Draco's bed.
Can you wake him?
Said a voice that Harry recognized instantly as Dumbledore's.
He's taken the somnolence potion I set up for him earlier, Professor,
said the voice of Madame Pomfrey.
Waking him now would be very difficult.
It might be worth a try, Poppy, Dumbledore said. He should know the recent breakthrough that Severus has had.
The words went through Harry like a blazing arrow. All his muscles tensed, and he thought instantly of his own frantic whispering in the dark. Let Snape find the antidote. Madame Pomfrey said nothing for a moment.
I think that I would prefer not to wake him, she said. The sleeping potion will have made him too groggy to properly comprehend the news.
Then we should go and tell the others,
Dumbledore said.
His friends, and especially Harry. They should know about the antidote.
Antidote. Breakthrough. Draco's not going to die. Crouched behind the table, Harry dug his fingernails tightly into the palms of his hands. For some reason, he recollected the moment 4 years ago, when he had heard McGonagall say that Ginny Weasley had been taken into the Chamber of Secrets, and at his side, Ron had collapsed silently, sliding wordlessly to the floor. He felt like doing that himself now, although in relief rather than in horror. His heart beat a hard tattoo against the inside of his ribcage. Antidote, it said with every beat. The antidote. There was silence now, and Harry chose that moment to slide silently to his feet, trying to balance the desperate need for stealth against the sudden hysteria that seemed to be gripping his chest like a vice. Using the shadows around him as a shield, he crept past the other beds and managed to make it out the open door and into the corridor before he began to run.
Did you hear something, Headmaster?
Dumbledore glanced up at Madame Pomfrey, who had half turned to look towards the infirmary door. The room was quite still, save for the drift of the loose bed curtains and the lengthening shadows along the floor.
No, he said, I did not. Poppy.
She turned back towards the bed and looked again at Draco, and the headmaster followed her gaze. Though he was deeply asleep, and Draco's sprawled posture made him look as if he had been flung from a great height, the hands clasped around the pillow made him seem younger than he was, and the moonlight coming through the window threw silvery lines along his bare, thin wrists. They made Dumbledore think of the veins running so closely below the skin, freighted with their weight of lethal toxins.
When will the antidote be ready?
Madame Pomfrey asked, without taking her eyes from the dying boy on the bed.
I would prefer that you not call it that,
Dumbledore said, raising his eyes to look at her.
What should I call it, then? Asked Madame Pomfrey. It is an antidote.
Yes, replied Dumbledore, although not quite the antidote we are looking for. It buys us time, doubles his remaining lifespan from 1 month to 2. We have not saved his life yet, merely prolonged it.
Surely it has given Severus enough time to discover the final ingredient, said Madame Pomfrey, with a trace of her usual stubbornness. The fact that he has identified every other is immeasurable help, all on its own.
Yes, said Dumbledore slowly. However, we must prepare for the fallout in the event that he never finds it. 2 months is not such a long time as all that. Not when you're 17 years old.
It was taking Harry longer than he had thought it would to pack, and his nerves were beginning to jangle with the tension and worry that someone would come in and find him, hurling everything he owned into his old knapsack. Explanations in this case might be difficult. He paused, breathless, and surveyed the wreck of his trunk. What exactly ought one pack for a vengeance quest from which one was not entirely expected to return? He'd thrown in his clothes, his sword, properly minimized via shrinking charm, his wand, Sirius's penknife, his invisibility cloak. He had no food and supposed he would have to buy some at the station. He zipped the bag tightly and stood up. His hands were shaking slightly as he crossed the room to the mirror that hung on the opposite wall and looked hard at his own reflection. White face, green eyes, black hair. There was color in his cheeks, fever-bright splotches of red. His mouth was a bloodless white line, and across his forehead the scar stood out as jaggedly as if it had been drawn there with ink. He raised his right hand and touched the scar lightly, knowing that concealing it was necessary. It made him far too recognizable. He took a deep breath. Oblitescus, he whispered, and winced as a bright flash of pain sparked behind his skull. Then it was gone. When he took his hand away, so was the scar. Next, he pulled his glasses off and muttered a spell to fix his eyesight. He stared at himself in the mirror for another long moment. Without his scar and glasses, he looked like some other person, some other Harry. It didn't matter. The scar was with him always, whenever it was visible or not, seared across his own internal landscape, the mark of his life's single defining moment. It made him who he was, the boy who didn't die, the boy who had been spared for a reason. And suddenly, Harry remembered Christmas Day when he had been 13 years old, Hermione looking at him with enormous eyes.
Harry doesn't want to kill anyone. Do you, Harry?
And his own voice answering back.
Malfoy knows. Remember what he said to me? If it was me, I'd hunt him down myself. I'd want revenge.
Oh, yes. Draco would understand his desire for revenge, as Hermione and Ron had not, and never would. He'd always known Draco to comprehend that dark part of himself, because he shared it. But he wouldn't understand being left. He'd promised not to leave Draco while he was dying, but some things were just beyond any act of will. And there was an antidote now, and he was glad about that, and grateful to Snape. But he also hated him for what he had said earlier that day. I promised to go, he thought, still staring at himself in the mirror. I promised to leave and not to let myself be found. But I didn't promise not to say goodbye. He turned away from the mirror and went over to his trunk. From it, he drew his quill and some parchment. Wearily settling himself on the edge of the bed, he began to write, something he had never been very good at. In fact, he'd always been terrible at it. but this time it seemed easier. Maybe because he wanted so very badly to say what he was saying now. Or maybe it was just that he was too tired to dissemble or to try to sound as if he cared less than he did. Eventually, when he was done, he set down the quill and looked tiredly at the 2 short letters he'd written, one for Draco, one for Hermione. He folded each in half and laid them carefully on his pillow. There was one more thing to do now. One last thing before he could leave. Shutting his eyes, he reached up and undid the clasp at the back of his neck that fastened the slender gold chain around his throat. He pulled it free, and the chain and the charm it supported slid into his cupped hand. He held the upper charm gently for a moment, then laid it down on top of the letters. When they came to look for him in the morning, they would find it here. He stood up then and slung the knapsack over his shoulder and walked out the door. Ginny, sitting beside Draco in the infirmary, wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. She had been heading in to say goodnight and had discovered Madame Pomfrey and Dumbledore leaving. They had explained to her that Professor Snape had identified every ingredient in the poison but one, and had constructed from that blueprint an imperfect antidote. It would slow the effects of the poison, but would not counteract it. "It's a treatment, then," she had said to Dumbledore, "but not a cure." He had blinked at her, then nodded before resting a hand on her shoulder, and asked if she would prefer explaining this to Harry and Hermione, or should he? She said she would do it, and had come into the infirmary to see if Harry would show up. Hermione, she knew, had been so tired from helping Snape work on the antidote that day that she had gone back to their dormitory. Ginny understood. She wondered how they would both react, wondered if they'd be glad at the extension of life offered to Draco, or simply enraged that it wasn't a proper cure. She wondered how Ron would feel if he were here, but the thought of her missing brother made her stomach twist unpleasantly, so instead she turned her gaze back to Draco. He had managed to wriggle his way out of his blankets and lay on his back with his arms over his face. Without warning, his eyes flew open, and Ginny jumped as he sat up as if propelled by some invisible force, knocking the pillow off the bed and onto the floor. She reached for him. "Draco?" He turned to look at her, his eyes full of dreams and confusion. "Ginny, what happened?" "Nothing happened," she said, and put a hand on his shoulder. He was warm from sleep, and she could feel the bones of his shoulder through the material of his shirt. "You had a nightmare?" "No." He shook his head. "I felt something." "What?" "I don't know." His voice was exhausted, almost fretful in its weariness. "Maybe it was a dream. I felt like I lost something, but I don't know what." His eyelids fluttered closed, the potion pulling him back down into sleep. Ginny pushed gently on his shoulder, indicating that he should lie back down, and when he did, she put her hand over his. "Where's Harry?" he asked groggily. "And Hermione?" "Hermione's gone to bed, but Harry's coming," she said, then waited for him to ask something else. But he did not. He was already asleep again. She sat with him, her hand on his, waiting for Harry to come. It turned out to be a longer wait than she had expected. The entrance through the one-eyed witch into the castle had been such a success that he marveled at the fact that he had never known about it before. He thought he'd known all the castle's secrets. He waited until night had fallen to enter, so that he could be certain that no one would meet him upon arrival. Now, the real trick was to find Harry Potter. He stood for a moment in the hallway, looking up and down. It was not unfamiliar. He knew that Gryffindor Tower was up a certain flight of stairs, and as he ascended, one of the paintings on the wall chattered at him, but he ignored it. Following the curve of the hall, he thought that this wasn't exactly the way in which he wanted the Potter boy to die, alone in his bed, without anyone to witness the triumph of Lord Voldemort's kill. But then again, he reasoned that perhaps this was how it was always meant to be. After all, he had failed to kill him quietly in his crib all those years ago. This would be a chance to rewrite that sullied history. Finally, he reached the portrait of the fat lady and gave the password, after rummaging around in Ron's memories. The fat lady herself was very discontented about being woken up at this time of night, but when she saw that it was Gryffindor's head boy, she relented with some mild confusion. Once inside, he slipped quietly up the stairs to the dormitories. Each had a brass number on the door, but had they not been marked, he would have known which one belonged to the 7th-year boys anyway. He pushed the door open and went in. Everything inside was dark and deserted, as none of the students had returned from their winter holidays. He could just make out the 4 poster beds with their scarlet hangings, like bloated red flowers. Typical of Gryffindors to be so attached to their vibrancy, and not appreciate the subtle nature of green and silver. Using Ron's wand, he muttered a quick Lumos spell, and the dormitory was suddenly flooded with pale light. He went quickly across the room to where Ron's memories indicated Harry Potter's bed was. His hands were shaking with suppressed excitement as he pushed the coverlet down. But instead of finding the object of his search, he found 2 folded pieces of parchment under what looked like a gold charm on a slender chain. He looked briefly at the necklace and pushed it aside, uninterested in what looked like ordinary costume jewelry, and cheap-looking jewelry at that. His gaze went next to the letters. He picked them up, sharply curious. The first letter was addressed to Hermione. This name sent something of a jolt through his senses, but he pushed it aside, feeling immediately uncomfortable. The name across the top of the second letter, however, was Draco Malfoy, the full name written out, and that meant something to him, but also to Ron, whose keen dislike he felt like a white-hot blade. With a gesture, he opened the first letter, the one to Hermione, and read it through. His heart began to pound. There was his own name, not his birth name, but the name he had given himself, woven through the letter, the history between himself and Harry Potter. But it also spoke of his love for this girl called Hermione, and how he hoped that they could be together again, once all this was over. He felt his hands begin to shake, and a metallic emotion, equal parts resentment and fear, began to settle itself in his heart. Annoyed, he crumpled the parchment in his fist and flung it into the fire, cursing. It caught and went up at once, bursting into ashes. He took a moment to breathe, to force himself to calm down. Then, very slowly, he opened the second letter and read it over. Draco, it feels weird to be writing you a letter. You always know what I'm thinking, so there never seems to be any point. But you're asleep now, and I think I should do this before you wake up. I know Snape has found an antidote for you. I heard Dumbledore tell Madame Pomfrey, and I know what I promised. I meant it, too. There are other things I thought you should know. Things I've never told you. Not properly, anyway. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the rest of the letter quickly. What was this about? Through his rage and confusion, he could dimly access thoughts of a friendship between Harry Potter and Ronald Weasley, and some wild intensity of emotion involving a girl. but he could not separate out the threads of Ron's hatred of Lucius's son from his thoughts about Harry Potter. His hand closed on the letter and paused. His fury urged him to destroy it, but the letters had obviously been written with passion and care. Destroying this letter would hurt the sender, that was true, but there were better ways to assure that Harry Potter's friends did not receive this last message, that they would not follow him to where he had gone on his quest of vengeance. This would cause chaos and confusion were useful allies. He read the letter again, and decided it would not be difficult at all to mimic Harry Potter's voice, and could see that it was quite a moving letter, really. This was good. An emotional letter was so much easier to twist and alter. He passed a hand over the surface of the letter. A surge of magical energy rocketed up his arm and through his hand, almost painful in its intensity. Ron was not a Majid, after all. He whispered a word, and the parchment trembled in his grasp. Slowly, the ink on the page began to writhe, as if the letters were tiny slithering snakes. They curled and uncurled, wound around each other, and formed new words, new sentences. Draco, it feels weird to be writing you a letter, but I thought if I didn't, there'd be more of a chance that you would follow me, and I don't want you to follow me. I know you want to help, but you can't help me now. I know I said that I would wait, but I think it's better if I don't. I know what I promised, but there are things you don't know, things you won't understand. He gave it a last scan and felt proud of himself. It was a cruel letter, without being overtly so at all. The cruelty lay mainly in its subtlety, in what it did not say, having so much of the original text removed. He placed the letter, folded, back on Harry's bed, with the gold charm necklace on top of it. Then he straightened up and began to wonder, at last, where this Hermione might be now. He wanted to see her face when she saw Ron, wanted to be the one to tell her that Harry Potter had abandoned her, and all she had left was him. Yes, that surely would erode away the strange ache in the pit of his stomach, and he left the dormitory to seek her out and tell her. Quotes. Never again shall you return to tell this story is from Dante's Inferno, Canto 27, lines 61 through 66. Callous and Strange is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that's it for this chapter, guys. Surprise! For those of you that are very familiar with this story, this is what I changed. This is the big secondary plot point that I completely redid. And I'm going to explain why a little bit. So, in the original text, Cassandra Clare had this thing where Ginny had gone back in time to specifically get Tom Riddle's diary because she wanted to destroy it. Because she thought to herself, well, if I destroy the diary, then, you know, none of that stuff would have happened to me my first year at Hogwarts, but also a powerful magical artifact that belongs to Lord Voldemort will be destroyed, and everyone will thank me because I did something good. God, it was really stupid. Ginny is extremely angsty in the original one, and not like in a fun way, or even, well, okay, that's not fair. She is angsty in a way that I understand for teenagers, but she's not angsty in a way that makes sense for Ginny. I kind of got the sense that Ginny was more of a stand-in for Cassandra Clare, and how she probably was as a teenager, which, yikes girl, insufferable if true. So that happened, And she goes back in time. Tom Riddle catches her and is like, who are you? And then it's supposed to be kind of like this, setup for when she starts to write in the diary, when it actually happens with the diary, to be like, that was one of the reasons why Tom groomed her, was because you remember this girl that was trying to get his diary in the first place and, was trying to enact some kind of revenge. I get it, but like, stupid. I'm being really mean. I apologize. But that didn't happen. Dumbledore intervened, and then Ginny ended up, going forward in time again. And she did have, pieces of the diary with her. And she had ripped it up. She'd started ripping it up, and she was crying, and she was thinking, I hate you, Tom, I hate you. And from her blood and the ink, it resurrected the spirit of Tom Riddle. And then, when Seamus, using the bracelet charm to stalk Ginny, which is another part that I completely cut out because I think that that's just, again, not like Seamus's character to do, and also gross. He goes into the room where she was, and all of this paper is kind of flying around, and then the spirit possesses him. And then for the rest of the book, we get to deal with this weird, dark romantasy kind of thing back before we had romantasy, where, Ginny is just thinking, no one but you, Tom, you were the best thing in my life, her groomer. I just, if you're going to kill me, you need to be the one to do it, and just because I love you and we belong dead together. It was so much angst. And of course, because it's Seamus, and Seamus, in the original text is in love with Ginny, it's just weird. It's weird. It's creepy. It's possessive, which is fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with having a plot point that dark. But for Ginny to just kind of wish that her groomer would return so he can murder her, not okay. Girl needs therapy. But the whole thing was silly. It was why I cut Seamus out. Because Seamus was really more like a stand-in for, he was more like the Riley character from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I might have mentioned this before, but I will reiterate. Dumb, hulking, useless, and is just like, my girlfriend is better than me, I'm gonna mope about it, just too much. So, I took that out, and I thought to myself, that plot line is actually very useful, and it's actually a good way to show how evil Voldemort really is. Because the biggest thing that Cassandra Clare refused to do in her original text was, it was like she was afraid to go there. It was like she was afraid to use the villain of the story to be like, yeah, this guy, he's a murderer, and he tortures people, and, he's not afraid to do stuff, like take out Lucius's eye, which I added, by the way, or possess Ron, and, because he wants Ron's power and Ron's youth and all of this, that, and the third. It just makes more sense. And now, with Ron being the vessel, essentially, through which Voldemort can see the world, there is more of a chance that the drama will heighten, and it will be much, much more terrible for these characters now, because one of their best friends is currently in a very dangerous, terrible situation. More gut-wrenching, in my opinion. Ron was there, why didn't she use him? She didn't use him at all. It didn't make any sense. Seamus was there and she used him. It didn't make any sense. Anyway, that's all of my rambling. Thank you for staying for that, guys. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, hello. And yeah, this was a long one. I've been talking for 2.5 hours. So I'm going to go do something else. I will see you all in the next one, though. Good night.